Okay, great. Looks like the audio is working. So, welcome everyone to this evening's session. Tonight we'll have another guest speaker talking to you guys. He's a good friend and industry colleague, actually former colleague of mine from Oric Aviation, Oisin Shields Ryan, and he will be covering maintenance reserve development, management, and he has a good presentation here for you guys tonight. He's covered this session, I think, for at least 3 or 4 times. Actually, no, since maybe 5 times now. But in any case, we're very lucky to have him. So you're very welcome. You might just before you start, maybe just to give a brief introduction or background about yourself, and then kick off per usual. It's same style, same format. So I invite you guys to be active and engaged and asking questions in the chat box there. And then Oisin, breaks, per usual, whenever there's a sort of a natural stopping point or nothing you're not familiar with already. Without further ado, I will turn it over to.
Thanks, Rob. Hi all. So, quick introduction about myself. I've been working in aviation since 2006. I started off with Lufthansa Technik in the engine shop they used to have in Dublin. They closed up in 2014. After 2014, I've been working sort of on assignment to GCAS for a year, and then I've been with Oric ever since. So a couple of years under my belt. I don't know it all, but I know enough to give you guys a good kickstart anyway. If there's any questions that pop up throughout the evening, just shoot them in chat straight away, and I'll answer them as naturally as possible without interrupting the slide I'm on. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm going to do a bit of a background in aircraft maintenance first. I know there's generally a lot of people with differing backgrounds that do this course, so the level of experience and knowledge might not be there for everyone. So if you do know it, just bear with us, guys, and if you don't, ask if you have any questions. So, just to get straight into it then, aircraft maintenance is broken into 5 main categories. And I know if there's anyone from an MRO here, a maintenance repair organization, they'll argue that, it's far more detailed than this, but essentially as a lessor, there's 5 pieces that we actually care about, which is the airframe, which is your heavy checks. That's on a Boeing, it's your 8, 10, 12. Airbus, it's your 6 and 12 year heavy checks where the aircraft's in hangar, taken apart, and a load of inspections that aren't generally done in shorter intervals are completed, but we've got a few bits on that. Landing gear, so a landing gear overhaul is, depending on the interval, the landing gear has to come off, be completely disassembled. There's certain parts that are called, or what's called life-limited parts. That means that they can only operate for a certain amount of time before they have to be replaced completely. So they'll be inspected and replaced as required. The gear gets reassembled then with new parts. The time since overhaul set to 0, and it's reinstalled on the aircraft ready for service. APUs, so an APU, an auxiliary power unit, is just a small engine with a generator strapped on the front. That's broken into sort of a medium repair or performance restoration category. Essentially, a medium repair and a restoration are the same level of work. It just depends on who your OEM is, your original equipment manufacturer. Engines are broken into performance restoration and overhaul, exact same as above. Engines is a little bit more complicated when we start looking at wide body engines versus narrow body engines, but for the purposes of tonight, we'll be considering a performance restoration to be what's required for a maintenance reserve claim, and an overhaul is just the full engine being restored, all modules. And then engine LLPs is the final bit we look at from the lessor side. What that means is, same as I mentioned in the landing gear, there's certain parts that have a limited life before they have to be disposed of. It's one of the crucial parts of engine shop visit management is understanding which LLPs will be replaced when, and just ensuring that we're not short building the engine or throwing away any life, and you're only reimbursing any lessee for what they're actually owed. So just to start digging into airframe maintenance, So the maintenance for the airframe consists of different inspections to check parts for any signs of part fatigue, failure, or damage. General checks are an A check, which is a quick check, doesn't require a hanger. It's generally performed as overnight maintenance, and they follow you roughly monthly. Now, different aircraft have different intervals for all of these, so these are just generic assumptions I've made. A C check is a detailed check falling due every 2 to 3 years, depending on the aircraft and operator. Some operators have what's called a AMP, so that's an aircraft maintenance plan. It's a customized document based on the MPD, the maintenance planning document, which Boeing or Airbus or whoever your OEM produces. This is the lowest level of check that requires access to a hangar. During the C check, the majority of the aircraft will remain intact, but certain inspections will be performed in areas that are not usually accessible. And then the heavy check, or a D check. So the D check is slightly old terminology, but just to make it as general as possible, I put this in. This is the heaviest check possible, which can be referred to as a heavy check. While this check is referred to as a D check for the purposes of a lease, it'll be split out to reflect the check interval as defined by the OEM. So for a lot of the examples tonight, I've used Boeing just because it's a quick and easy one. So Boeing heavy checks are performed every 8 years, 10 years, and 12 years. So that's from the date of manufacturer. It's not from the date of the last heavy check. So after 8 years, 2 years later, you'll do your 10-year check. 2 years later, you'll do your 12-year check. A C check can be done in a couple of days, usually. Sorry, there's a question here from Caroline. I need to get used to this again. How long does a C check or a D check take? It depends on the aircraft type, but in general, a C check will take a couple of days, maybe a week at the upper end, on a 737, and then a D check can take 3 to 4 weeks, depending. The big item with the heavier checks, the D checks, would be what's called non-routine findings. And a non-routine finding is when you're doing your inspections as per the maintenance planning document, you'll find a crack somewhere that isn't referred to within the manual, and you'll have to go and get a repair designed by Boeing. You'll have to get the repair conducted. So these are the sort of findings that actually extend the length of the checks. So just, I put in a few pictures and examples. So this aircraft here was one we had a couple of years ago. This was being repossessed from an airline in Asia. We were putting it into a new airline in South America. So as part of that, we had to perform the 8-year check. So we ended up pulling out the interiors of the aircraft and pulling up the floorboards. And I think so pulling up the floorboards here, and these strut beams, we found several of them cracked. So while a normal heavy check would take up to 3 weeks, I think this aircraft took about a month and a half, because the level of repairs required to repair these beams was extensive. Boeing had to design the repair, and it took weeks to get material in. So all these items actually add up when you're conducting heavy maintenance. So then, after the month and a half, we slowly got the aircraft back together. This is a picture of it shortly before it was ready to fly. You can still see, actually, on the left-hand side of the picture, there's still some exposed cabling and pipes in the back of the galley there. But by the time the aircraft flew, the coffee makers, the ovens, the boilers, everything was back in. So I just wanted to give you an appreciation for the level of disassembly that went on. So moving on to landing gear overhaul. Sorry, is there a question there? No, sorry, it's coming from Rob. So
Actually, that was my comment.
yeah, no, you're all.
I was just saying that as an aircraft gets older, to Steve's point, right, you're more likely to find these sort of faults or issues. So the older the aircraft, the more likely is you'll have to perform non-routine maintenance, which will obviously extend the length of the repair of the check.
Yeah, like basically asking how long a check is how long is a piece of string. It's it's as long as it needs to be. But yeah, as it gets older, it does get much longer. Okay, so landing gear overhaul is determined by one of three factors. So there's a calendar interval, which is a set number of months that the manufacturers say the landing gear needs to be overhauled in. Also, there's a cyclical interval, and that's the amount of takeoffs and landings allowed before an overhaul is required. And then obviously the damage. So if, I don't know, a luggage cart drives into the side of a set of landing gear, that landing gear won't be allowed to fly again. It won't be able to be repaired locally. So it will actually be required to be sent to the maintenance facility. The overhaul consists of disassembly of the gear to piece part level and a full inspection of the exposed parts and repair as required, and then reassembly. Many of the parts are life-limited parts, although many of the parts will never actually reach their cyclical limits. The parts, when they're disassembled, undergo inspections and non-destructive testing to ensure they are serviceable to be used again. So I don't really have any great case studies of landing gear overhauls, but what I did want to touch on was NDT. So what you see here in this picture is a part going through fluorescent penetrative dye. What that means is, it's soaked in this dye with really low viscosity, so it'll run into all the cracks within the part, really high viscosity. When the part's cleaned and there's a black light shone on the part, the penetrative dye will actually seep into any cracks that we wouldn't normally see with our naked eye. So when the black light is actually put onto the component, you'll see the cracks radiating through it much easier. So it's an easy way of identifying whether something's a crack or just a mark without actually destroying the part or component. I've included a bit of a case study here. So back when I was being first trained up in aviation, one of the big things they actually did with us was they kept giving us different incidents and reasons for the way we do things today. One of the reasons for NDT and being an advocate for good repairs and quality